Legendary Stories of Lance Mahoney. The following is a recorded tribute to the life of Lance Frederick Mahoney, born September 28, 1946 in Chicago, Illinois, to parents Fred and Elayne Mahoney. He passed away on Father's Day, June 21, 2020, in Fresno, California. Lance was a man loved and valued by many, some of whom share their fond memories of him here. Visions of a Loving Heart by Lance Mahoney. I see my image in the smile of the summer sunrise that illuminates the eyes of the searching sky, and I see myself seeking the heart of the setting sun while absorbing the wisdom of each day passing by. I see my spirit within myself, reflecting on the brink of the world I see, where I see mankind's highest nature, sharing love thoughts with you and me. I see my presence in the midst of nature's delight, and in view of reflections, I abound. And I see myself in the melody of a love song, and in the harmony of the love I have found. I see my silhouette in the glow of the stars' glitter shine, and in the beacons that enlighten my way. And I see myself treasuring life's inner fortunes, which give birth to our essence each day. I see myself cradled in the palms of heaven's loving hands, and in the aura of God's eternal light. And I see my soul in the telltales of creation, and the heavens fill my world with God's sight. I see myself sharing with you my vision, for you are in the heart of the creation I see. And I see the healing in the caring self, and I see myself seeing life loving you and me.
My name is Tammy. Lance Mahoney was my father, oldest of 5 children. The first 10 years of my life, I lived in Fresno before my parents divorced, and my mother and my sister and brother and I moved to Alaska. My father stayed in Fresno. I think I was probably 3 years old the first time I can remember my dad being silly and playing with me, and it was in the kitchen floor of our little pink house on Cambridge Street in Fresno. And I remember laughing hysterically as a little girl while my dad was doing whatever he was doing, silly and jumping around in the kitchen and rolling around on the floor with me, and ultimately getting scolded by my mom. I didn't get scolded. My dad got scolded for making too much noise or just being too loud and silly. That's my first memory of many memories of laughing and being silly. My dad was like a grown-up child, and I loved that playfulness, and that's my first memory of my father. I would have to say my favorite memory is actually the last time I spoke to my dad, and that was on May 30th, 2020, so not too long ago. I had recently watched a docuseries on the Vietnam War and learned more about the war, and as well as the facts of the war that came out through this docuseries resonated with me in a way that it hadn't before in my lifetime. And I came to a realization that I really needed to reach out to my dad and thank him and honor him for his service, as I understood at a new level what these young men endured in Vietnam. And it was something that my dad didn't discuss with his children. At least he didn't discuss it with me. It rarely came up, and it never went in depth. And so it was kind of an unspoken rule that my dad wasn't comfortable talking about that. He was comfortable talking about anything else, but he never brought up the war. And that was the primary reason I made the call to him on May 30th. And we talked for 10 minutes. I told him that I had watched the docuseries and that I wanted to honor him for everything he had done, and that I'd never said that to him before. And he thanked me for that. He didn't continue to talk any further or give any details about the war other than acknowledging that it was very difficult. And we proceeded to talk about his current health status and some medical issues he was experiencing. And I was able to tell my dad how much I loved him and would always love him and speak to him from my heart. And I am so grateful I had the opportunity, not knowing he would be gone less than a month later. My dad's last words to me after he told me he loved me back was to ask me to keep praying for him. And I gave him my word that I would continue. My actual answer was, I am, I will, and I do. That last conversation will remain precious to me forever. My dad's life, his influence, his energy, his humor is inextricably linked to mine. And I take comfort in that. I take comfort in knowing that my dad is no longer in pain, that suffering is no longer something he has to endure. My dad will forever be in my heart until the day it stops beating. And I'm so very grateful that I am becoming a more fully realized human being, a more caring, compassionate, and empathetic person because of Dad. I am grateful and comforted knowing how much my dad positively affected the lives of others. He loved to make people laugh. All he ever wanted to do was to make other people feel comfortable and to make sure they were not feeling left out. And I know that he left an impact on every person he met, even strangers who didn't stay strangers very long because he was so darn friendly. And the love and the laughter that my dad spread on this earth continues to grow and will live on. And that is the ultimate measure of any human being, in my opinion. So he helped me, but I watched him help others in the family, outside of the family. I watched and I reflect back, and it was something that was very consistent. He was a treasure to countless others and a gift. And I'm so blessed to have a father who left that legacy. I do have a kind of a crazy memory of my dad wasn't necessarily trying to sell me on this, but he was trying to sell something that wasn't true. It probably wasn't legal either. It was at my brother Travis's college graduation, and at that time I had one child. My daughter Lindsay and I were there in Montana for Travis's graduation. My sister and she may have had two children, but we had a van full of people in this rental van that Dad had rented, and my stepmom Pat was there as well. And Dad had backed into something and scratched the back part of either the tail light or the back part of the van that he rented. And so he decided, rather than report that to the rental company, that we would stop and replenish the jelly beans and other sweet candies we had in the van and go mud bogging in the van so he could turn it in very dirty and muddy, which would not disclose the scratch on the back of the van. And I just remember my daughter looking at me and with this, what in the world is happening? Because we were laughing, but we were disturbed at the same time. And it was actually pretty funny. It took me several years to really look back on that incident and find the humor in it, because I I knew it wasn't right what he was doing. But as I look back now, it was just one example of the incredible lengths that he would go to cover his tracks, or maybe not cover his tracks, but the amazing lengths that he would go to outsmart someone that he thought he needed to be more clever than. As a child, after we moved to Alaska and coming to visit for the summers, I remember going with Dad when he worked for the school district as a speech therapist. He did some, I don't know what his job title was in the summer, but I remember going to different schools with him and seeing how he interacted with kids. I remember going to the Special Olympics with him one year, and we made all three. I don't know how many of his children were actually there with him. I just remember being there, and I was probably 12, maybe 13 years old. And, everyone would seem to just be drawn to my dad. As far as the charisma he had was immeasurable, and there were no effort for him. He didn't have to dig deep to try and be charismatic around people. It was just something that he was. And so I watched that as he encountered adults, as he encountered children. He just made people feel good. And that was something I got to witness during our summer visit each year when he was involved in that work or in that profession.
My name is Tonja Marie Mahoney, and I'm Lance's daughter. Well, my earliest memories would be going to visit him in California. I would be so excited. He appeared to me to be a giant of a human being. He just was so tall and had the strongest hugs. He would hug me so hard, I think that I would break. And we would only have about 2 weeks time to share with him. And there was never really a plan ahead of time. We flew off the seat of our pants each day, but there was always kind of a mixture of what I would call a normalcy as far as a routine, mixed in with adventures throughout the day, things that he would come up with off the cuff to do to keep us entertained. And then I would just remember having times whether, he was multitasking in the car or where we were at, he would take the time to have one-on-one conversations with us that were meaningful, really made me feel as though he knew who I was, what I've been up to, kept tabs on all the other months that we weren't there. He seemed to know. Do have a couple favorite memories. The one I would call more of a tradition. It was a story that he made as easily as this was for him to do. He made it into kind of a lifelike story, but it was an active story. So that, for instance, when there was a big rainbow outside, he would get super excited, kind of like a kid, and go into the same story of, oh, you know what that means? The leprechauns are out. And they've created a trail so that they know exactly where they're hiding their pot of gold. And if you only see this rainbow if you have Irish in you. So can you all see it? We'd all be able to see it. Okay, well, I bet that if we follow that rainbow, we're going to find this pot of gold. And leprechauns were very real. There have been a lot of dead stories, but that one in particular came up a lot. And so on any given day, we'd all pile in the car, all excited. We'd drive, and Dad would kind of narrate. We'd have to close our eyes, though, and we couldn't see because the closer we got to the pot of the rainbow, there were the light energy might hurt our eyes. So he wanted us to close our eyes and stuff. And at one point, we'd usually park somewhere, and he'd say, you guys stay in here. Let me go check it out. And, I don't know where he would go during those little chunks of time, but he would come back always with candy and say that he was able to find that pot, and here's our reward, and we'd all celebrate. Wow, wow. It was kind of a magical thing, but in my mind, it was very real. So now I can look back and go, wow, I wonder exactly where he went, but it ended in a positive note, and it was always kind of a neat adventure. And I still think to this day, whenever I see a rainbow, that story comes into my mind, and those adventures of riding in the van, with our eyes shut, and we're just shaking with anticipation and visualizing these leprechauns, and sometimes he would tag in the story and the history behind leprechauns and Ireland, and how many of them there were, and how they have to cloak themselves so that nobody else sees them, and it just kind of cultural reinforcement that he really wanted us to think a lot about. Hey, you have some Irish in you, and these are some of the stories that go along with that. Just to make it funny, a couple times I did peek, and we did end up at the racetrack a couple times. There must have been a concession stand or something that he was able to. But it was the only way you can really get kids to keep your eyes closed and not look out. He did a miraculous thing a few weeks before his passing. He called me and did some research and had taken notes and just really lined me out as far as applying for the pandemic unemployment insurance. And before that, we had discussed it, and I said, I'm not applicable. It's not something that would apply to me because I don't qualify for unemployment insurance. So carefully explained to me, it's almost like he knew all the questions I would have asked and had done the research ahead of time. So I came up with a lot of questions. He said, no, I've looked into that. You will apply. Here's where you need to go, and step by step by step. And he even had here's where you might have a little problem in answering. So this is what you need to say. And I 100% guarantee that you will get benefits, and not just benefits. You ask for retroactive benefits from the end of March on forward. And it was just nobody had ever told me that before. In the back of my mind, I thought, yeah, this is probably not going to work, but I'm going to try it. And sure enough, it worked. And it worked step by step with what he said. Even the questions that would have messed me up, he knew the exact approach to those. So he did. It was a gift. So much of a gift, because it just being applicable for these services made such a difference in my life financially overnight. It was absolutely a miracle, and I thank him so much for that. I think the funniest memory, kind of one of those weird memories, but we were in the store a few years ago, and he wanted to try on some clothes because you know how he's about clothes. And so he went into the dressing room, and I was kind of halfway across the store, and I heard a lot of loud commotion and laughter, and I instantly knew it was my dad. Well, he had come out with a very feminine looking muumuu and high heels and a necklace and a flop hat, and was talking in a female's voice and prancing around the room like he was on a walkway, spinning and asking how he looked. And the reaction from people was like everybody was laughing. They thought it was the funniest thing they've ever said. So it wasn't like anyone was tackling him down or questioning his sanity or anything like that. I was the only one standing there just mortified because I was thinking, this isn't going to end well. But in retrospect, it was the funniest thing in the world. And he even had like this, how he had gathered all these things, but he had like a wig, so his hair was all long and stuff, but he still had dad's face. And he kept saying, I found it, Tonja, I found it. This is it. I found it. Thank you to everybody that helped me. You're going to get big commission on this one. How he does like ad libs, as he goes, but it makes just even funnier and funnier. But what would he do for humor? Not in a mean way. It was just to brighten the lives of those around just for a moment at his expense. I think he did that quite a bit. Ah, yes. I think there is a definite division among how people feel about Dad. My strong feeling is that as self-destructive as he was at times, his heart was always in the right place. He made decisions while under the influence or without clarity and foresight, but he would help any person. He's always been drawn to the underdog. He would always go the extra mile. His time with Special Olympics, his time, there's just been so many good things that he's done in this lifetime to help other people. And I think the biggest message was that he was never able to help himself, and that takes a toll. I hope, and I have no control over this, but I really hope that in the reflection of his life as a whole, that people see that level of goodness as is not something that you find easily on this earth. That level of connection with other human beings, selflessness in a way that, may not seem like at times like he's being selfless, but really, he's protected us or tried to protect us from a lot of the bad that's been going on. And I feel like above everything else, no matter where I've been in my journey, I've never received anything but unconditional love from him. And knowing that I have that on this planet without judgment, this common thread of unconditional love and understanding has pulled me through more times than I can count. I will be grateful for that forever. I miss it, and I know I still have it. I can feel it around me. So I hope we can honor a wonderful man. I think he deserves all of our love and gratitude, because I think for someone to touch so many lives so deeply in so many ways says a lot.
I am Travis Lance Mahoney, and I am Lance's third child and firstborn son. I remember as a child being excited every summer I was able to fly out from Alaska to Fresno for my annual 2 to 3 week visit with my dad and extended family of Pat, Lancey, and Michael. It was a very special time for me, and we always seemed to do fun stuff together. My dad was like the big fun dad every child would want to have. Fresno summers opened up such a different world for me from living in Alaska and being in a small town. Fresno was just this big family going into. My dad was a very large personality. It just seemed like such an extreme. Even the temperature in Fresno from Alaska, it was just a totally different world for me. In so many ways, my dad Lance was my hero, whom I looked up to and I wanted to be like. He had such a big personality, it just drew people to him. He was playful and fun, and I remember often wishing my friends had the opportunity to meet him and know him like I did. He was the ultimate fun dad that my friends would have looked up to and loved. In 1993, I left Alaska for college to Montana, and I started getting closer to my dad. I'd often drive the 17-hour trip from Bozeman to Fresno during breaks at school. During those times, we started connecting more on an adult level. After graduating college, I moved down to Orange County, about 5 hours away from Fresno, and we continued to grow closer during my Fresno visits, which were a few times a year. My favorite memories with my dad, going to Disneyland as a kid for the first time was one of my favorite memories. Anytime I got to be playful with my dad, whether it was playing in his pool, throwing the baseball around, shooting hoops, watching movies together, those were good times. One of my favorite memories was going to Candlestick Park in San Francisco in 1989 and being able to watch the Cubs play the Giants, and that was the year the Cubs were the division champions. My dad strategically got us these seats directly above the Cubs dugout, and before the game performed his persuasive magic and was able to get almost all the Cubs players to autograph my baseball. I was such an avid Cubs fan at the time, and it was one of the coolest days of my childhood to get Ryne Sandberg, Andre Dawson, Mark Grace, Mitch Williams, Jerome Walton, Rick Sutcliffe, Sean Dunston, and more on my baseball. My dad was certainly the hero on that day until he tried to buy the ball off me for $300 later, which I declined. Summers at Dinky Creek camping were a good time, good memories, minus my fights with Lance Jr. And then anytime we were able to go to Blackbeard's in Fresno was fun. Our times at the movies were great. My favorite movie with him I remember watching was Goonies. After I graduated college, Dad and I went on this trip to Yosemite Valley in his convertible Mercedes with the top down. It was so much fun spending the entire afternoon riding bikes, and we even journaled together in the meadow. It was one of the few moments I remember my dad letting his guard down, enough to allow him to feel close to me in the moment, and it was such a good thing. I know it touched him because afterwards he kept talking about how much he wanted to do it again. I got the sense it wasn't easy for him to feel close to others, and this was an entirely new experience for him. I think that day we both experienced a moment of togetherness neither of us had ever truly experienced with one another, at least not as adults. Looking back, I think it also scared him to go there again, at least with me. Some funny stories of my dad trying to sell me something I knew wasn't true. The first one that comes to mind was when I was younger, my dad and Pat took us to Disneyland. I remember going on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and there was this part in the ride where you go under a bridge, and there's this drunk pirate character singing something while he's dangling his leg off the side of the bridge. My dad made it a point to point at his leg as we were approaching the bridge, and he began to tell me this really convincing story that his leg was a real human leg that was donated or taken from someone. It was a real human leg. He even told me, look at the hair. See, it's real, He's trying to convince me. And I believed it. I believed that story for years. And I even passed that fable along to others until I knew better. Sometime around 2006, when I was visiting Fresno, ready to head back home the next day to Orange County, my dad called me. I remember it was late in the evening, on the eve of when I was about ready to leave, and he wanted to take me out to dinner. I remember telling him yes with the caveat that we need to find somewhere close by because I needed to go to bed early that night so I could leave early in the morning to head back to Orange County. He agreed and said, okay, I know this great place to get a steak dinner, but we just have to drive a little bit out of town. So I reluctantly agreed, and after about 30 minutes or more driving into the foothills, we arrived at Table Mountain Casino. Never been there before. My dad pulled up to the front of the building under the porte-cochere, and he was immediately greeted by an entourage of people who began treating him like royalty. Welcome, Lance. We'll take your car for you. Have a wonderful evening. We entered the building. It seemed like everyone knew him. It was crazy. They waved, they smiled, and it was like, I remember going up the escalator, and just like everyone was looking at us, and it was like I was walking with a celebrity or something into this whole new world that he must have been living in for quite some time. And so we get to our table, this nice dining room table, and we ordered our food. I got a steak, he got a lobster. And soon after we ordered, he had to excuse himself to go to the bathroom. He said, I'll be right back. So I'm just like, okay, that's cool. I'm sitting there, and then after 45 minutes, he still hadn't come back. I had already finished my dinner alone. A manager lady came over to me and asked, are you Travis Mahoney? I'm like, yeah. And she asked me to please come with her as my dad had just won big in some special private room. He called for me to come while he was waiting to get his payout. So she walked me down a bunch of halls, and there was a special high-stakes room. And inside of this room, it was all $100 minimum slot machines. And one of them was going off. The lights were going off, flashing all kinds of colors. And he had won something big. And it turns out it was like $6,000 or $7,000. And while we were waiting for the payout from the casino, my dad insisted I take a wad of $100 bills and play the machines because he was on a lucky hot streak. I remember trying a few machines, putting these $100 bills in. I couldn't believe I was doing it. No luck. I think I just burned through like $600 or $700 in a matter of minutes. And eventually I convinced him to walk away with his winnings and go eat his cold lobster. We ended up getting home around midnight that night, and I really didn't know what to make of it all. A couple years later for Christmas, I received a nice package from him, and he told me he had something especially made for me. On Christmas, I remember opening the box. It was a lot of these little cool collection gifts that had my initials, TM, monogrammed on them in a large font, and it included this nice black leather jacket, stainless steel mug set, and a bunch of other items. And I was really grateful for the quality of the gifts, but I started wondering, like, would I ever wear this around? This really nice leather jacket with a huge TM on it? And something just seemed off about it. And it took me somewhere between a few minutes and an hour to piece it together. And so it hit me. I'm like, okay, I get it. My dad had acquired or purchased these gifts from his new favorite place, Table Mountain, TM. I had a good laugh about that one. Memories of my dad helping or inspiring me. Well, when I was younger in Little League Baseball, my dad fueled that passion for me on our visits. In the summers, we would play catch, and he would encourage me with my fastball and even taught me a curveball. And then he began telling me stories of how he almost went and played professional baseball when he was younger. And he started telling me stories and that he would throw a 92 mile an hour fastball, and people just didn't want to play catch with him because he had such an arm. He saw the same potential in me, and I was really inspired by him and received his encouragement, and it really affected me. I remember going back to Alaska that summer and just was so dedicated to baseball and wanting to be the best baseball player I could be. He helped me pay rent when I was going to college. As nerve-wracking as it was some months when his check came late or very last minute, but he came through in the end, and I'm really grateful to him for that. During the past few years, we had some good conversations here and there. I was usually surprised when they happened because I wasn't expecting them. On a recent conversation, he asked me what I was up to, and I told him I'm working on a book and went on to tell him the premise. I could hear the excitement in his voice, and he lit up. And for about 10 minutes or so, we started talking like old times. Whenever I had an idea I shared with him, he was always very exciting, and he kind of like put his spin on it. And it was encouraging to have someone resonate with ideas, and I think we share that in common. He had some nice words of encouragement for me, and to this day, I'm choosing to hold on to those encouraging words that he said to me was just a few months ago. Overall, I'm grateful for my dad's life. I know deep down he did the best he could with what he was given, and I have many great memories with him that I will cherish. It is also true that my dad broke my heart many times over, as he did with countless others during his bouts with addiction. I have learned God's gift of forgiveness and the power of Jesus to heal the losses, disappointments, hurts, and trauma from living in this fallen world. Thankfully, God gave me the grace to forgive and love my dad despite his shortcomings, as I have also asked for forgiveness for my parts. I knew deep down Lance was a wounded man himself and a survivor. My biggest hope and desire for my dad during the last decade of his life, when he was at his lowest, was that he would be able to receive all the love and support he consistently had from his family. The Mahoney family as a whole never gave up on him, and they loved him with a heart of compassion where he was at. I now find comfort in this, that once my dad left this earth on Father's Day 2020, the veil was removed and he stood before Jesus. I believe at that moment he finally became the prodigal son who came home to receive that loving embrace from his heavenly Father, who has always been there for him with outstretched arms. And I look forward to seeing my dad Lance one day in glory and who he is after all his tears have been wiped away. I love my dad and I'll miss him dearly.
My name is Michael Mahoney, and Lance is my father. So growing up with my dad when I was younger, he made every experience more fun. We would have that old house on Menlo with the cul-de-sac. I don't think a day went by that, wasn't, hey, let's go shoot some hoops. You want to shoot some hoops? Let's go shoot some hoops. And he'd ask you until you went and shot hoops, and we'd play basketball, football, always some activity out there, having fun. We're recording on the 4th of July. And it makes me think about all the 4th of Julys we had together, and we'd go to Santa Cruz, and it was never enough to just watch fireworks. He would buy as many fireworks as he could, illegal fireworks, whatever he could find, and then we'd go somewhere and blow them up all night, and fun stuff like that. Never enough to just experience something. He had to throw himself in the middle of it and make whatever activity we were doing more fun. There's just a million little things. Every Sunday we'd want to go to a movie or go to a matinee. I remember one time I was playing with my friends on a Sunday and he came to pick me up. Thought it was time to go home and he was, hey, you want to go watch a movie? And he took me to go see Tommy Boy, which ended up being one of my favorite movies. That was a fun memory. But Cubs games, Bulls games, talked recently a lot about watching all the Michael Jordan championships growing up and how much fun that was. And one of the things he really helped me out with was getting into college and also a lot with sports. I was involved in a lot of athletics. My dad and mom would travel around me all across the state all year long, doing whether it was track or soccer and making sure I got where I needed to be. And, I was always really nervous about sporting events, and he always had a way to kind of lighten things with his humor. Could really help ease the nerves you had with a silly joke or a million high fives that he gave to everybody, or offering you some jelly bellies or whatever it may be. Never went without a bag of candy somewhere hidden on his person. Good one that sticks out. Like if there was a barrier you were not supposed to cross at a public event, he would sit there and sell whatever. If it's a parking attendant, didn't matter. Getting into the fair, getting into a Fresno State football game, he was going to talk that person into letting us park for whatever reason he could come up with, or get into somewhere we weren't supposed to get into. And everyone just seemed to go with it, and he would always find a way to convince them. And I think about that a lot, because he just would talk his way into anything, and everyone seemed to just kind of go with it. Very convincing. I got one story. Growing up, I had hollow bone cyst in my pinky, and I would break my hand all the time. And I remember they did a surgery on it initially and filled it with some kind of hardening fluid that was supposed to fill the bone so it wouldn't break. That didn't take. So they did another operation where they grafted bone marrow from my hip, and my own bone marrow didn't take. And so I remember overhearing him talking to somebody, and I don't know where it was coming from or what the purpose of this story was or who was on the other end of the phone, but him being overly dramatic that he thought maybe I had cancer. And there was no basis in the world for anyone to have ever thought that or said that. It was not anything other than a hollow bone cyst. And, I always wondered if that was a sympathy tale he was telling to somebody or something, but it definitely didn't have cancer. They ended up actually giving me a bone marrow donor from somebody, and that took, and I never had a problem with the finger again. At his heart, he was a very good person. He would always say, it was like his motto, that all anybody wants in the world is to love and be loved. And I think about that with him a lot, because there were times in his life when he had so much love, and then sometimes when he didn't. And I think that's where that came from for him, is that phrase, is that he knew when he had it and when he didn't.
Hi, I'm Lanai Mahoney, and I'm Lance's oldest sister. Lance was a lot of fun. He seemed to be very happy, laughing all the time, getting into mischief. Oh, and he liked to tease me all the time, and he hated it because I would scratch him with my nails, and he'd go run to mom and dad, and then I'd get sent to my room. He'd do things to make me mad, or tease me about my freckles, or just a lot of stuff, because he was always up to something. I remember even one incident at Christmas, and he was out and he opened up all my packages before I got out of the bed, and then he was opening everybody's Christmas package. And he used to get up at night around that time, I remember, because he was sneaking around and trying to open Christmas packages. He was kind of favored because he was the first boy. Mom had 2 daughters and then Lance. He was a favorite, I believe, with my father too. And with, I think, Grandpa Mahoney really favored him, because he'd go over to his house, and I can remember when Grandpa would always give him coins, and Lance would go in there and steal the little pennies and nickels he had. He'd take all the extra. He was a little character, and Grandpa never said anything to him, and everybody liked him regardless. He was liked. He was probably 12 or 13. We were living in Concord at the time, and he was in Oakland. He was doing it. He was visiting because he was young still, and he was thought it was an alley. They were playing, the kids were, And somebody fired a gun and it ricocheted and went into Lance's leg, and he only had like an hour or something to live. They called my mother, and it was so scary because she told us that he had an hour to live. We were all praying because the bullet had shattered. And they ended up, Lance made the headlines of the Oakland Tribune, smiling, sitting in the hospital bed, and they got it out. It was just a miracle. Well, when he was young, he used to follow me everywhere. My dad would put him up kind of as a little spy. And he was in the trunk of my dad's car one time, trying to see if he could watch what was going on around the neighborhood. He'd open the trunk and look out. I don't know. I always thought Lance was happy-go-lucky, though. He was a happy child and mischievous. It's probably 77, 78. I worked at Madera High with him, and he was a teacher in a special ed, and I was assisting in there because one of the teachers that helped went to Australia. So I subbed and was working in the classroom with Lance. It was about 15, 18-year-old boys that were trying to help graduate. And Lance was, to me, he had such an impact on these boys. They listened to him. They respected him. And I always remember that. And they looked up to Mr. Mahoney, this. And he just was wonderful with them. And they did succeed. And that's what was so wonderful. And then there was the fun side of him in the classroom. On the back of his door, so the other teachers didn't see it, he had a full-size nerd picture. Some guy picking his nose, so they had a time for laughter and a time that they, Lance didn't let them get out of line or anything. But I was amazed. And he also worked in juvenile hall, and he was good with the kids. He was wonderful. Sometimes he'd share the stories with me. And I mean, he really had a tough job, and he used to take it home with him, I think, too, because he would be a little bit down over some of the things some of the kids went through. Right. But I wish he had stayed in that. Well, favorite memories another one would be of Lance when he had to go to Vietnam. Tammy was born, and they let him come home. He was in Fort Eustis, Virginia, and he came home, giving birth to Tammy. And I remember he looked like a kid himself, in that picture holding Tammy, and he didn't want to leave her. And like I have those letters, I have the one in particular, which I gave Tammy a copy of, where he talks about to give her his love, and if something happens, it was a good letter from him. And that's another memory, because Lance told me things that, like being in dugouts, and he was afraid, and he never killed anybody, so I can imagine what he went through, and how they would give the guys over there drugs, so, that would kind of ease their pains more or less. But what was so traumatizing for Lance was when he had to go down in a helicopter, and he was a gunner, and he helped rescue some men, and then also his best friend was blown up right in front of him. So I remember those memories Lance shared with me. And I think only to come home and have tomatoes and food thrown at him as he got off the plane. I mean, they didn't ask to go over there. They were sent. He was drafted. When he first went over, he was afraid because he'd never killed anyone. And more or less now he was going to have to.
My name is Lisa Maureen Mahoney Parker. I'm from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and Lance is my very first brother, born exactly 1 year and 3 days after I was born. And because of that, I never forget his birthday. All right, growing up with Lance was exciting and at times a great big challenge, because Lance always had a scheme or two up his sleeve. I always ended up getting mad at him because I thought he was really spoiled. Because in those days, the girls did all the work. The girls did all the babysitting. The girls, did all the cooking and the cleaning, and the boys got to go out and play. So my memory of Lance as a young boy was that he didn't have to do anything. He was pretty spoiled. It's true. I used to get so mad at him. Okay, my memories of Lance. Okay, I guess I could write a book about that. His jokes, his brilliant mind. But when I think about Lance, I think how he when he loved a song, he played it 100 times. He played it so much that all of us hated the song. And the other thing I remember is Lance and Lonnie were probably the only two of the many siblings that absolutely loved horror movies. They would sit and watch horror movies and then keep the whole house up at night because they scared themselves silly. Oh, there was three. But three was another memory of Lance. Many people don't know that Lance wrote beautiful poetry. He often sent me his poetry and even spoke to me about his writing less than a year ago. We shared that gift in common because I write poetry and short stories too. He was really a deep thinker. A lot of people don't know that about him. Underneath all the laughter, there was a deep person. You know, Lance was the first of many Mahonies to embrace 12-step recovery. He inspired more than one of us. And he would send me tapes from AA conferences up in Yosemite. And basically, he was my hero. He was. That's the sad part about. And, you know, it's like, you know, that was still him. I mean, not just the failure. I have a memory about Lance. Lance was always doing something that would just completely cause a total chaos. I was in the hospital. I'd had a real critical surgery, and Lance came to visit me. I don't even know the reason why he was back here in the Midwest, but he came in to visit me in the hospital, and he came carrying this big, instead of a flower arrangement, he said it was a fruit arrangement. And it had apples and oranges and nuts of all kinds. And he walked in the room, dropped the whole arrangement with apples, oranges, nuts, fruit rolling all over the hospital floor. And I had a big operation, and I wasn't supposed to laugh. Anyway, the nurse came in and threw Lance out because I took a fit of laughing that was, I couldn't stop. He couldn't stop, and fruit and nuts rolling all over the room. And the nurse came in and made him leave. So that was my humorous. But most of all, the way I want to end it is I loved him. You know, I loved him.
My name is Patrick Mahoney. I'm Lance's younger brother, second oldest boy in the Mahoney family. He and I, as the two older brothers, we stuck together, pretty much joined at the hip through thick and thin. A lot of adventures. It was always fun and exciting. Lance shot up like a weed. By the time he was like 12 years old, he grew a foot taller than me. It's almost like it was hard to keep up with him after that. He had such a good sense of humor. He could make anyone laugh anytime, and he always brought a lightness and a gladness to anybody in any situation. Lance always was kind and a big brother to me, always offering good advice. We went in the military together. He went in a little for me, but he always would contact me to make sure I knew what I was walking into. He always wanted to make sure my way was made easy. Now that pretty much was the theme through our whole life. He stuck up for me times when bullies would come and pick on us or be breaking up a baseball game we were in. We'd run home and get Lance. And Lance would save the day every time for us. You just didn't tread on a Mahoney. You had to go through us all. That was Lance. He was a force to be reckoned with. And then just like that, times of trouble, when the going gets tough, he would get tough, I'll tell you. After being married, settling down, and coming from the war, he definitely grew up. He became a dad, and it was precious to see him so relaxed and settled. It just totally impressed me at how he could adapt and change. We were just in different platoons, but I always hit the fort that he had just left. So he was in training at Fort Eustis, Virginia, back in 1967. I was in basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana. I got orders so I could join them at Fort Eustis, Virginia. By the time I got there, he had left the day before, going on a 30-day leave for Vietnam. At that time, I approached the post commander, asked if I could please go in his stead, because at the time he had just, I think, Tammy was about a month or 2 months old. So the post commander told me that I would be robbing Lance of his honor to die for his country. I did not agree, and I got in a lot of trouble when I used a lot of flamboyant adjectives in his general direction. But when talking to Lance about it, he said, no, you don't want to do that. Don't just let it play out. I was there. He called me at least once a month or more often through Vietnam, through thick and thin. I lived his every move, every situation, and every fear. Our bond was just that strong. A lot of good times together. Big brother, finest big brother a guy could have in every way. He was the epitome of not a con artist, but he could manipulate you. He could sell ice to an Eskimo. I mean, that he was that good. He could hit all the right buttons. He could read people. And when we were young, he would always be instigating sales jobs for us. Of course, at his direction, he would, let's do mistletoe, it's the holidays. He'd take us out to Sanger, show us the trees. We'd all climb up in there, much of the younger brothers. We would get mistletoe. He'd have us put it in Ziplocs, and we'd sell it at Mayfair, drug fair, grocery stores, and then he'd show back up to collect the money, of course. And then we'd never see him again. That's the catch. So that was it. We'd all quit him after about a weekend of that sort of action. So, but he really could sell. We'd go into, let's say, Penny's. We'd be shopping downtown on the mall. We'd go into Penny's, and he would walk right over. He'd see some customer, and he would walk right over to him and go, "May I help you?" And "Do you work here?" "Yes, I do." And he would start showing her where everything was and sell stuff to her just for fun. And then he'd turn around and say, whenever she asked if he was done, he just like, "Okay, got bored. That was fun." And they'd go, "Oh, are you leaving?" He said, "Yes, I really don't work here." And the customer would just laugh and go, "My goodness," and just get a big grin. And he'd go off laughing. He just could just like put on a hat and wear it, and he was convincing at all times. Great at making up things to do. Being the older brother comes also with, he's the defender of the family. He had to pay his dues, I'm sure, and you learn a few tricks of the trade. So I really think a lot of that just in the family. Our grandfather, Gilbert Thomas Allen, he was a salesman, and he was also he was the kind of person that found a job during the Depression. He was an efficiency expert. Companies would call him to come in, and he would walk a plant for a week and then say, combine these jobs, cut those jobs out, let those guys go. Here's how you're going to save. He found work being able, because he was just so talented and gifted at seeing a situation, how to remedy it or how to bring it together to make it actually function and work right. So I think in degrees, Lance probably got the lion's share of that. But Lance, he could sell anybody anything. When you see people's needs, if you were not being, as I say, if you weren't being helpful, you could be manipulative. But Lance, he could extend to them. I believe that's why he did what he did in college planning and different programs, helping working at, I don't know what kind of a school it was, for kids that were struggling. We used to call it the Wolf back in Fresno when I was a kid. It was a school for guys that were just not kind of suited for regular school, having issues, family problems. Lance could reach those people easy, Like I said, he knew that. He's been there. He felt it. And he had compassion on him. And so he would go, hey, I know right where you're coming from. Let me point you in a better direction. They'll help you get through there. And they respected him because he earned their trust because he told them the truth. He was great at that, trying to bring that out. He could make others realize the gifts they had and see the potential and how to harness. He was excellent at that. He loved that. War stories are, like they say, full of confusion and not happy. But I got called in every scary moment of Lance's journey there. So I lived with him through it all, was always in prayer for him. And I know Jesus Christ answered my prayers and his and had mercy on him, that he was able to even walk away from that place is a miracle. But it came with a lot of peripheral struggles later in life. They took their toll. Nobody came back from that just okay. Wasn't a cakewalk for anybody. Lance flew. He was the assault coordinator for the Air First Cav Hellcat unit. And just if you ever watched, I don't know what movie with Robert Duvall of Vietnam, that is exactly what he did. He rode with like their real life Robert Duvall. And he was the guy that was feeding information to the rest of the pilots, telling them where they were going, what attack formation. He was the assault coordinator. That ship went down. The CEO, captain, he was killed. The pilot killed. 2 other crew members killed. And one he thought was dead, left, but later found was taken prisoner of war, was a doctor. The medic, the field doctor, always went on these trips, but they all traveled with the CEO. So they were the ones that flew above a situation and were sending in all the other helicopters, dropping off, whether it was troops, providing air support. That's what his team did. They were bad news and well feared among the Viet Cong. But he did. Later, that doctor got released, and they were best of friends. There was no knowing, no time. Lance literally ran for his life. It was only a few miles away from when they had taken off, and he was chased, literally, being shot at. And there was a training we all went through for Vietnam called Run, Dodge, and Jump, and it was jumping over potholes, bombs had landed. It was just evasive, fast. You're just hit the ground running. It was all about time and speed and never running in a straight line. He called me to say that saved his life. And he said he got close enough to where his defense perimeter of their base recognized him, and he was being chased, and he dove into one of those foxholes, and they were able to shoot down the guys chasing him, and he made it back. But it was a run for his life all the way back. That's a true story. He is a real fighter, survivor. He's a living example of that. And I know the sufferings he went through in these latter years and a lot of pain, but he didn't really put it on everybody, kind of withdrew to himself, but he dealt with pain. That's how he dealt with it. He was tough. Oh, that's a little heartache for probably a lot of us. You wish he could have confided in us more about that and we could have helped him more. But that's how he chose to deal with pain.
I'm Dede Mahoney, and Lance was my big brother. I have some memories of him being very there for me, having me run little errands for him, and always being very helpful and kind as a big brother. There wouldn't be enough time on the face of the earth for everybody to go through and capsule Lance's life, because there's so many stories. There's so many, I can't even process them all. But one thing I do know about my brother Lance is that, sure you'll hear it over and over, was he just had a huge, huge big heart. So for me, I'm going to miss that big heart of his humor. He would tell stories till the cows came home. He'd make me laugh. He'd make me cry. Always exciting. He would have me run little errands for him. My mom had sent me back and forth to Chicago to live with my grandmother. By the time I got back, I had memories of Lance, and I was in high school, and then he went off to Vietnam War. And I remember one incident stuck out in my mind was when he came home. I don't know if it was on leave, and I saw him in his uniform, and it made me cry because he was so proud to serve in the country. I think my mom burst out crying, and I just looked at him and was so proud of him. But my memory with Lance, it sticks out. As I said, he had the biggest heart ever. And when I lost my daughter, Sarah, he showed up immediately. I think he was one of the first ones over to the house, and he took over from that time forward, journeyed with me through the whole process, paid for the whole funeral, and took care of everything. I'll never forget that, his big heart. He had the humor like nobody, but that particular memory is forever indented in my heart. And then he would be so funny too, because then he'd say, we have to have a meeting, and I couldn't stop crying because I was so sad, and he'd be pulling me aside to have meetings in all the rooms. But his generosity and his selfless, he was very selfless. He would call me all the time, even when he was in and out of the hospital with many surgeries and roller coasters, but he would never want to really talk about himself. He'd always want to talk, what are you doing? How's it going? And then get into something funny, and then he'd be laughing, and we'd be laughing. And so he never wanted to draw too much attention to himself. It was always about everybody else, and he'd always be talking to me about his family, you guys, and how much he loved you and how he loved the country. He was very up to the end when I'd go see him at the VA hospital. And I'd say, I love all these flags out here, Lance. I know, isn't it so nice? I'll miss his phone calls. He was calling me a lot. Oh, I had my moment. I said he was the only one that drove me nuts, but then I would be nuts if he didn't call, because I missed his calls. I would go see him, and sometimes in the destitute of the destitute. Sometimes I would, for many years, when I lived out in Kerman, I had a little routine. I would pick up your dad once a week and take him to get a haircut, buy groceries, and then we'd go to a movie. So I did that for about 5 years when he was really down and out. Sometimes I'd cry all the way home after I'd see him. So it was a very mixed bag of emotions. Despite whatever Lance was, even my daughter came in here. She said, despite everything, Mom, I loved him anyway. And that's how I feel. Amen. Despite everything, I loved him anyway. I loved him, I loved my brother. I loved his big heart. I loved his humor. I'll miss our calls. I know that song came to me when I was at Mary's, the clear blue sky. All of a sudden in my head, I was thinking about Lance. And that came very, how the Holy Spirit works. Through people, through thoughts, through songs. And the songs started playing right when I was thinking about Lance. The words started coming to me. I've been redeemed. And so I've been set free. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna look that up. That keeps coming into my head, this thing. And so I'm gonna just Google it. Mary was in the room, and I Googled it, and then I listened to the words, and I was like, oh my God, because I didn't have a face with the song. It was just words coming into my head on Sunday. It just followed Lance. So I do believe in my heart that he's set free from all those sins and failures, all of that. God knows, he knows our hearts, and we don't know the last minute that he had second with God, I think it's just given us peace. There's no more shackles. He's redeemed.
I'm John Mahoney, and I'm Lance's younger sibling by about 4 years. He was the oldest boy, and I was the third oldest boy. Lance was the leader of the family. He was very active, involved with a lot of friends, activities, sports. Lance ran principally with the older siblings, so Patrick, probably Lonnie and Lisa, some events. But I didn't get to do a lot of things with Lance as a young boy, but I did do a lot of things with him later in life. I had the good fortune of going to college with Lance. Lance, even though he was 4 years older than I am, spent 2 years in the military, went to Vietnam, and when he came back, he enrolled in college, and that allowed him to go to school about the same time I was going to college. So Laura, my wife, who I was dating at the time, myself and Lance went through a lot of the same curriculum. Lance and Laura majoring in speech pathology or speech therapy, and I in audiology. So we took a lot of courses together and we were very competitive. And I think we actually pushed the curve up because we were all pretty much high academic achievers. So it was a lot of fun going to school with Lance. We used to go over to Lance's house some nights and study. It was just good times. A young family. We were young kids ourselves. And I think Lance really enjoyed having been in Vietnam, the opportunity to come back and go to college. Lance is very philosophical. I had some great conversations with Lance over my life that were very deep and meaningful. We talked about his experiences in Vietnam. He had a very in-depth, analytical approach to his time in Vietnam, why he was there, some of the experiences that he encountered, and how when he got there he was a kid, when he left he was a man. But he told me that many souls passed through his hands, and specifically friends of his that died in his arms. He said, I sent more people to heaven than most people will ever do in a lifetime. I prayed with them. I consoled them. I talked to their families after their passing. And he felt very good about it, that he had been there for these people at that time in their life. So Lance shared those experiences with me. I always remember having meaningful conversations with him about life, about the impact of that on his life. But in general, I admired Lance's relationship and his care for young people. He basically took on some of the most difficult cases in his life as he moved from education to troubled kids. He worked in special programs with troubled kids. He would take on some of the most difficult cases and love those kids like he was their parent. So even at his worst times, Lance was always a good person to young people. And I think that's what stood out the most to me is his love for children. And he always tried to help them. And I think God will bless him because of that, regardless of some of the faults and flaws that we all have as human beings. Overall, Lance is somebody I admired greatly. Lance is complex. In the one hand, he would give everything off his back for somebody. He would allow people to stay in his homes. He would go out and see people that needed help at night. He would just do anything for kids and families. Yet he often didn't take care of his own family and himself. So like a lot of great men in history, I've noticed similar traits. Some of the most beloved people that lived on this earth, their families are estranged from their own father. And it's a paradox of life. They're good to humanity, but oftentimes sacrifice their families for their devotion and dedication to helping others. And that is the paradox. Sometimes their own family members don't understand it. It is strange, but I've known several people that have been like that. And these other people that they've helped, they love the man. And then the families don't understand their own dad. But he was very much like that. Lance was a very dynamic personality. Inside of that soul and that mind of his was a machine that was moving at the speed of light. He was constantly thinking about the next opportunity, how to do something better, how to improve something, mostly on the social scales. So sociology, philosophy, child development, academics. He moved into the financial world later in life. He was very good at it, but I used to always tell him that his strong suit was with children and education because he absolutely loved doing that, and they loved him. So when Lance moved into the financial industry later in life, there were a lot of people sad, and I also think it was a changing time for Lance, and it changed Lance from what he was earlier in life to a different person later in life, just different dynamics. But he and I would talk and philosophize well into the night oftentimes over a cup of coffee or whatever. Just a lot of introspection, a lot of soul searching, a lot of questions about why and where he was going. So he was a soul always searching for his destiny. Well-traveled road, I would say. among souls. He probably has met more people and helped more people than most people will ever know. I remember talking to him about the later stages in life where he had left everything abruptly, inexplicably, and for no apparent reason, put himself out on a new course that most people didn't understand. And I would say, Lance, you have to come back, to your family and faith. He said, what makes you think I'm not? I'm doing the Lord's work every day, everywhere I go. And I said, okay, what do you mean? He says, well, there's a lot of people on the street, a lot of people that I know that need my help. And I help them every day. I counsel them. I guide them. I'm still doing what I've always done. I'm still helping people. He told me that not that long ago, probably within the last 3 or 4 years ago, because I got him close to coming out about 3 or 4 years ago, and he got really close and things went awry and he went back. But those are the conversations that we had. He was saying that he still felt like he had a mission in the life that he was living, and he was finding fulfillment in it. I didn't understand it. The way he explained it, he thought he was still doing good. Very interesting, yes. Smart man, I can tell you, I took courses with him, some pretty high level curriculum and, the upper division level. He was right in there with my wife. My wife's pretty smart. I was probably the least qualified of the three, but I gave him hell, and when I beat him on an exam or something, he didn't take it well. Competitive and smart. And then later on, he went back to school. And, again, the guy was very well qualified in the child development area. On the other side, the problem children or children with disabilities, learning disabilities or familial difficulties, families that were broken, he would help heal the kids. Again, he would do work that a lot of people didn't want to do. Lance would take it on and do it well. Again, that's the part of Lance a lot of people don't know. Beloved among that community of people that worked with kids. He was trustworthy in that capacity. He was loyal to those kids and those families. But on a humorous side, I can remember a typical, this is in maybe our senior year in college, speech pathology, audiology classes, phonetics, that type of thing. I think Lance and I took a human anatomy class together where we had to dissect cadavers. Typical day, we'd walk into the classroom. We're all coming from different courses and curriculum. My wife somewhere, me from somewhere, Lance from somewhere. And we would converge in this next course. And Lance would walk right up to the front of the room and put chuckles on the podium for the professor. My wife would come in and she would put her notebook on the podium for the professor. My wife taking the most copious notes of anyone in the class. And I would walk in and say, would you guys stop trying to buy your grades? I'm going to beat you in the class. So giving them the chuckles and the notes isn't going to help you. I had nothing to offer the professor except my good looks, my charm. Anyway, it was a comedy though, and the teachers in those courses that we shared, the teachers loved us because we were good students, we were good academics, and we studied well together. We worked hard, and we really were good at what we did. We took it seriously and professionally. Lance brought a certain maturity level to the class. He was our senior and just had been back from a grueling adventure. So he brought some seniority to the otherwise youthful academic experience. And we loved him. He was my brother. We all got along. It was fun. Lance ran with the older boys, but a couple times I got into his world a little bit. And one of those times was when he had a paper route in Concord, California. This is a newer subdivision, so half the homes were under construction and half of them weren't. And Lance had a paper route that he'd run about 4:30 in the morning. So a couple times I got up with him and my older brother Patrick, and the three of us would go out and do papers. And halfway through the route, Lance would say, okay, I think we're done. And Lance still had, 150 papers in his paper bags hanging from his bike. So we'd stop at the bridge over the creek and he'd throw them over the bridge into the creek. That was Lance. He was ready to be done with the paper route. Shortcut king. there is an end to the story. But later on, there was an article in that same newspaper, which was a local newspaper at that time, about the creek getting dammed up by all these newspapers that were being dumped in. And we thought that was hilarious. He was, I would say, a maverick, I don't want to say a MacGyver, but he knew a way to fix everything. There was always a way to get something done. Lance has been self-sufficient and self-sustaining since he was 10 years old. I'm not kidding either. Could be a combination of his environment, but I think Lance was born with innate skills to handle people, handle situations. You know, he was unafraid, unabashed, and 100% confident he could work through any situation, even the ones he created himself. I could just think of 100 different things. Oh, you can't take that class. Oh, that class is full. Oh, you can't change majors now. Oh, you can't take 2 degrees at the same time. Oh, whatever. There was nothing Lance wouldn't try to do. There was nothing he couldn't get done. And he'd tell me, okay, I've done this work out here. This is what we're going to do. There was always a way to get things done. Always. And to his last day, I don't think he ever ran into a roadblock. He told me, I think the last I talked to him 2 or 3 weeks before he left the planet, I said, Lance, you're running out of lives. He said, I know it. Can you believe it? I'm still alive. And I said, I can't believe it. You know, I only know a handful of things, but all of them you should have been dead by now. But he was convinced that his number had not been pulled. He just had a love for life, a zest for life. I think some of the stresses of war and all the other responsibilities in his life changed him. At some point, there had to be a moment where it just took its toll on him and he couldn't recover. So the last thing I talked to Lance about was I was encouraging him to write a book. And we had looked into different apps, you know, to help the beginning author. Lance was very capable of writing and speaking on the fly. So I told him he would be a perfect author. He told me it set some outlines down of the premise of the different books that he was thinking of writing. So I was encouraging him because he said he was spending a lot of time alone now. And I think that had to do with mostly his health issues of the last 12 months, where he was not able to get around as much. So I spent a lot more time thinking and putting his thoughts together. So I was just trying to get him to put them now down on paper.
Hi, I'm Blaise. I'm Lance's younger brother. Growing up with my older brother, Lance, was always very interesting. Lance always had something going on. He was very much into sports, whether it was baseball or I remember often playing football with he and a bunch of his Vietnam vet buddies. And we'd meet at the Roding Park in Fresno, and 20 people would show up, and we'd have a great football game. And Lance always was spearheaded it. He was, to me, Mr. Athletic. Yeah, one of my favorite memories with Lance is we used to, because he was so big and we were all much younger than he was, it was during the time where big-time wrestling was very popular on TV. We used to gang up on Lance. It'd be Peter, I, and I think Brian even got into it. And we would just ran and tackle him, and he'd throw us across the room, and he'd eye gouge us, and he'd act like he was hurt. And he always was fun to be around, and we had a blast. Yeah, Lance helped me out in professionally when I was struggling with an employee when I was in the insurance business, and I confided in Lance. He helped me put all the facts on the table, look at it, and kind of calmed a lot of my fears. And I really, really needed it at the time. He was amazing how he could go from Mr. Deity to serious and pragmatic. His counsel was real solid, too. And I took his advice, and everything seemed to work out fine. Lance helped me professionally one time when I was in my insurance career. I was struggling with employee problems, and I confided in Lance, and he mentored me and helped me look at all the facts and calmed all my fears. And with his counsel, I was able to come to a kind of a peaceful resolution to what I thought was a disaster. So Lance, although I always saw him as kind of clowning around and having fun, when the time came to be serious, he was there for me, and I'll never forget it. Lance oftentimes he didn't fit in any one mold ever. He confused a lot of people and frustrated me at times. But one thing he had that was so endearing to me was he had a heart that loved. He had a heart that was welcoming. And one of his favorite sayings to me, as I would often visit Fresno, living in the Midwest, he told me, and his favorite line was, "Mi casa es tu casa." And that was Lance. He was wide open, loving, and as far as he made you feel, you could do no wrong.
This is Peter J. Mahoney, Peter Joseph, and the youngest brother out of 6. I remember Lance, I was looking up to Lance when I was younger, and always remembered his quick wit, always there to help whenever you needed to ask for anything or you needed something, he was there to help at the drop of a hat. Sorry I wasn't there closer with him all those years. And of course, I've been overseas and I've been in Pensacola for 40 years, but I've made a lot of trips back and forth and over the years and enjoyed all of the trips we've had together and all the things we've done together. I'll never forget it, ever. What it was like growing up with Lance was pure excitement, just never know what to expect. He would bring the house down. He would always be the center, always there to help, but also just create so much humor when there was a dull moment going on, or just he would bring excitement into the household all the time, no matter what. It could be over dinner. It could be waiting in line to use the phone for 3 minutes and people fighting in line in the hallway and Lance would be in there and he'd be on the phone and nobody would take the phone from Lance, So we had to wait our turn for Lance to get off the phone. One phone in the house and there was all those people waiting and there was no screening calls. There was no all the stuff we have today. It was just fun. It was just hilarious. Yeah, I miss my brother and a lot of the stuff, when when I was smaller. Blaise, we were pretty young when Lance was already in high school. We were 7, 8 years old, roughly 6 or 7. It's a gap. There's a big gap there where I kind of remember when we were in Illinois, Mundelein, and we hadn't moved to Fresno yet. And I think I remember we had this house on Maple Street, big 2-story house, and it was a pretty big house. We had a big backyard in the back. We'd all go out there and we played wiffle ball. We had all the brothers out there, and I think some of the sisters played too. And we just had some great games. And Lance, he was always ready for a game at the drop of a hat. Always, even then. And he would put the ball in the orbit, and it'd take a while for the ball to come back down. So you kind of had to wait, and then the eclipse happened, and then here came the ball. As you know, his sense of humor was second to none. That, and I remember when he came home from Vietnam, I think he had come home, he had already been to boot camp, he was at his uniform, and I looked up to my big brother in his uniform and what he was doing and where he was going, and I believe that was probably, I don't know if I was 9 or 10, somewhere in that range, I believe. He always told me, believe in yourself and don't be afraid and move forward, and that was before he went over to Nam. I always remember that. Don't give up on yourself, and off he went. It was just surreal because I was so young. And then when he came back and we'd run around and horse around. And one of my favorite memories of Lance, all the camaraderie, of course, when I came out to visit, he always opened the door. I would stay there with him. I stayed with him with Lynn when they were very young at the house. And then when I come out in other trips by myself, or when I was married to my wife Diane, I always stayed there, and they always made us welcome. And there was, but one of the times, I think it was 2004, we had a gathering at Brian's up in Truckee, and we had a 50th birthday party for myself, and we went out golfing. Lance came up, and we were about to tee off, and Lance had shown up with Pat and Michael, and I think we went out to play golf, and Lance had took a big handful, it was warm that day, and a huge handful of sunscreen, and just put it all over his face, just like forehead and eye, and he forgot to take his glasses off, and the front of his lenses were all white, and he couldn't see, and then the whole rest of the round of golf, his eyes were burning, or he couldn't find his ball, or we drive up in the woods, and he'd be over there looking for his ball, and he couldn't. It took a while for that to go away, but it was just a crack up the whole time. He'd hit his ball, everybody else being afraid, right? Lance would be out in the woods looking for his ball, and it was like 6 miles in, you would never find a ball unless it had GPS on it. I said, Lance, come on, we got people behind us, and then at the end, he took me back to the place he was staying, and everybody was waiting for it. There was a surprise party there for me, my 50th, and I think we were also doing Brian's. His was a few days before mine, and Lance kept me there too long. He kept piddling around with stuff in the house and doing this and doing that, and it ended up being like an hour late, and then when we got there, I was like, everybody was out there waiting, surprise, and we were like about an hour late. It was fun, but people are annoyed because he kept me there too long. So it was a great time, and great to play golf and have all that going on at the same time, and have a bunch of people there, and special. That was special. I just always remember Lance. He was always positive, and I remember helping him one time. He was helping somebody do a fence up in the foothills somewhere, I believe, and I went up there. We were trying to put a fence together and all that, and he was there to help. He said, whatever you do, put your all into it. Even if it's whatever it is, as minimal as you think it is, give it your 100%, no matter what it is. Do the best you can at what you're doing, and I always remember that. Tried to boost confidence in me when I was younger and didn't know what I was doing and where I was going, I always appreciate that. Then he would hit you with his wit, and then you would laugh until you were starting to cry. It was. I remember one time I had flown in with my wife, and we had got up early in the morning, early in Florida, and we got into Fresno. And he said, well, I got to run over to the office. We're going to hang out here at the office for a little bit. And then 2.5 hours later, we hadn't got back to the house yet. We finally got back to the house, his house. He said, well, let's go get something to eat. I know a place. I said, sure, He wanted to go up to the casino. I didn't even know there was a casino in Fresno. And we ended up driving out there, and he was driving like, bat out of. And we get there, he pulls up underneath, and they go, hello, Mr. Mahoney. You want us to take your car for you? And Pat had looked over at him, and she went, Lance, how do they know your name? Meaning Lance was a frequent visitor. And then we finally got out of there. By the time we got home, it was like 11 o'clock midnight. And we had been up since 2 in the morning, Fresno time. Took us 2 days to get over that one. I just always remember as far back as when Tammy was a baby, they always opened their door for me. And later on in life, they did the same thing, always. Sitting up and watching old movies. He loved watching movies and enjoyed the camaraderie and sitting there and hooping it up and laughing. And he would try to be doing his work, of course, sometimes, and you're watching TV and he had 16 things going on. Or we'd be driving down the road and he'd have 5 bags of candy in the middle between the 2 seats. And candy would be flying up like a shredder, it was like a popcorn machine. The candy was just flying up in the air, He'd be catching it in midair while he was driving, and his head was halfway down, looking for candy as he's driving. Or if somebody cut in front of him, he would be like, jump on the hammer on the car big time. And there was another time, and I don't know if somebody mentioned this already. I wasn't there on the flight over because I had come over at a different time, but we had that gathering when Brian had gotten some tickets to the Super Bowl. I flew up from Pensacola, Brian and Kettrick. And then Lance and Michael had flown out. And apparently on the flight over, Lance got sick or something was happening on the plane and he was getting weird on the plane or something. I don't know what happened. And they were going to turn the plane around and they didn't. We ended up going to a Bears, watching the game about the 35 yard line, watching a Bears playoff game against Seattle. It It was awesome. It was a great time having them there, watching the Bears play in a playoff game. The Bears ended up winning the game. It was Blaise and me, Brian, Ketrick, Lance, and Michael, I believe. That was pretty cool. Lance was ecstatic. And there's other memories about Lance in Wrigley Field. Apparently, there was a game going on, and we were watching. I don't know if we were in Illinois at the time, and the Cubs had won this big game. I don't know if it was a playoff game or just won a big game. And some guys jump off the wall in the outfield onto the field and come running towards the infield, and it was Lance. Yeah. Apparently, I don't know if it was a playoff game or just a big Cubs game. They won the game. There was something happened. I don't know if it was a home run. And suddenly he jumped over the wall onto the field from the outfield and came running in towards the field, and it was Lance. And then we were watching it on TV. He was probably, I would say, 16, 17 maybe. It was before we moved from Mundelein, Illinois to Fresno in 63. That was the first time we moved to Fresno. We went back in 68 for that summer because my parents still had the house there. And then they sold the house and we came back that same summer back to Fresno in 68. So I believe it was probably 63 or 62, 63 range. I don't know if he ever got in serious trouble or not. I said, who's this guy flying over the fence? And the outfield was Lance. And boy, he had an arm on him my gosh. He could have played in the professional sports without a doubt, no doubt. I mean, he was just an athlete, he's a pure athlete, He had an arm. Yeah, I miss my brother.
Hi, this is Mary Mahoney. I'm Lance's younger sister by about 9 years. And I wanted to say I love him and will miss him and continue to love him presently. I'd like to share what is in my heart when I think of him to me. He was my friend. He was my brother that I came to know more later on in life. He was my therapist. In therapist, I mean, he would listen and give me feedback and make me laugh to where I forgot I even had a problem to begin with. Lance had a laser beam answer to some of the issues that I had that I've never heard from any other, which to me made him very intelligent and spot on. Half the time he would make me laugh where I couldn't breathe, and then I'd pound on the table and I'd look up and he was gone. He had either left the table or he was hung up the phone or drove off. I'm not sure, but he would leave me breathless. He was extremely colorful and engaging. He had a presence about him. He couldn't always see his part in his issues, and every once in a while he'd dip into self-pity, but he never stayed there. I have a story of him when I was 8 or 9, when we were somehow, my younger sister and I were with him driving out to a lake at dusk. And he said, you see that over there? And we traveled across this big field, and up in a tree was mistletoe. And next thing you know, he's climbing up there with some cutters. We brought it back to the house, cleaned it up, and threw it in some little baggies with sandwich bags with red ribbon around it. Next thing you know, we're cold calling door to door we had to be in our uniforms from the Catholic school, and we would sell it door to door. And he would be right behind us, but he always saw an opportunity to take advantage of the season or take advantage of something to make a little money on the side. And it was creative and brilliant. When I look back on it, I giggle about it now. Like, where was my mother and father when this was happening? He let me tell some jokes. It wasn't always him. Towards the end, he would listen and he would laugh at my jokes with me. In the last 6 months, he ministered to me with my health issues, with kindness, compassion. He listened and he would call to pray for me, even though I knew he was suffering too. In closing, I wanted to say I heard a song, the lyrics of shortly after hearing that he passed, and it was, I see you dressed in white, Lance, every wrong made right. I see a rose in bloom at the side of you. I see you dressed in white and every wrong made right. I see your rose in bloom at the side of you. Oh, so priceless. The last 6 months, he ministered to me. But he ministered to me throughout the last few years. I was bringing him to church. They loved him at church. He was getting ministered to about a lot of his guilt and shame. and he wanted to go a lot. A lot of times he just couldn't make it, but he would come with me to church, and my lady friends would want to get their hands on him and pray for him and love on him. And so, we got kind of close in that, and when he could make it, he would come. I have a dog story, a Dalmatian, our dog Duke story. And the Duke story is before we moved to Illinois again, I was a freshman, he would come over to the house because my mother wanted to drive around in the car, and it was late at night, and someone would call Lance. So Lance would come over and found out she was trying to go somewhere, either get something to drink or, I don't know, take a drive because she needed to calm down. And someone would call Lance. Next thing you know, Lance would show up, and he would see the situation. He'd go right out to the hood of the car, and this is what he told me. I would take the spark plugs off of the car and the engine and put it on the front lawn, and I'll be damned if she didn't drive away with Duke in the passenger seat, the Dalmatian. And we would scream laughing because there's no engine and there's no spark plugs, and she'd still manage to drive the car down the street, which is all crazy because you can't, but I mean, I was right there with them laughing like that. I'm not surprised. So you'd always try to sell me stuff like, was Duke driving, Dalmatian driving, or was it Mom? I think it was Duke this time. And Duke had this despondent look on his face. And so, but I want to throw in another story that you can use or not, but it's Nelson's story, but he's sick, so he didn't get to tell it. But when we went to Reno about 10, 15 years ago for a 50th birthday party with Aunt Jan, and there were several of us there, and your stepmother and everybody, and Nelson and Lance decided to go to the blackjack table. And the blackjack table, an hour or so later, they came back, and Nelson was so frustrated because he said that they had eyes on Lance the whole time because he couldn't keep his hands still on the table. And then when he'd go to bed, he'd drop a jelly bean in the middle instead of a chip, and the jelly beans were rolling. Then he'd go to pick them up, and they had spotters on both sides, and they were chastising him. And the game was a mess. Nelson said he lost hundreds of dollars because my brother Lance wouldn't stop playing with jelly beans and fiddling around in his pockets. And they kept hands on the table, sir, hands on the table. So I just thought that was so funny. It just makes so much sense. Instead of, do you want to hit? Do you want to fold? What are you doing? And, a black jelly bean would roll across the table. And Nelson did not think any of it was funny. He was furious. He'd tell Dede, would you bring me some more candy? And one time we went to visit him, and she goes, I just brought you 3 bags a couple of days ago. Well, they're all gone. And then he had to get up and get something off his bed at the Veterans Hospital, and about 30 of them fell on the floor. They were tucked in his underwear and everything else. I would just say that he became a brother that I wanted to know more and hang out with and take his calls. Like I said, it's been in the last 6 months that I grew to love him and his humor and his depth that I saw in him, other than maybe not being present. I became to love him and say, I love him in spite of everything. And I don't know how long he's going to be around, so I accept him. And I just began to lean in, and he leaned back towards me, or leaned in towards me as well. And that is the gift.
My name is Peggy. I'm the baby of 12, and I am Lance's sister. For me, he was my hero. As a very young girl, I remember kind of always him buying me trinkets like funny looking sunglasses with stars all around them, and candy, and little plastic sandals and little plastic shoes that I could walk around in the house on Carmen. And one time he bought me a little baby kitten, and he brought it home, and a week later I got ringworm, and my mom got so upset because he bought me that little kitten without asking. Needless to say, the little kitten went bye-bye. Lance and I hung out a lot together when his family was young. We were always very close. He's the one who introduced me to AA. He had 2 years of sobriety himself, and he told me of a place called Avante Outpatient Treatment Center. We went to AA meetings together a lot, and I got sober because he brought me into the program. The first 2 years of my sobriety, oh, how I looked up to my big brother Lance. His nickname for me growing up, and even till the last day we spoke on the phone on his birthday, my nickname he called me was Lumpins. I love being called Lumpins. It was very endearing to me. It's heartbreaking to lose my brother to the disease of drug addiction, and somehow I knew he had to escape from all the pain of his Vietnam years and childhood trauma, along with the loss of so many closest to him, like his mother and his son Lancey. I'm thankful to my brother John, who helped me a few months ago by saying to me, "All that I know, Peggy, is that I love Lance, and I'm required to love him. That's all God asks of me. I help him when I can, and I pray for him." And as a result of those words, I called Lance that day and began to re-engage with him right where he was at, addiction and all. I encouraged him with my love and concern for him. We talked a lot and texted one another pictures of the family. He loved seeing the pictures. I love the sound of his voice, my big brother, who always ended his calls with, "I love you, Lumpins. I will miss you, Lance, so much, but I know I will see you again in heaven." There was one other part that I had remembered. When I was 18, I had just given my daughter up for adoption, and I went into a catatonic state because I basically lost my child. I gave her up, and it was so painful. I fell into what they called a catatonic state, and they had to put me in a hospital. And I didn't sleep or eat. To my knowledge, I think I was in there 7 or 10 days. I remember all of it because I was awake. And I remember Lance coming and pulling up a chair next to the bed where I'd lay, and he would take out family photos, and he'd stick them right up to my face. Well, keep in mind, I didn't talk. I was basically dissociated so far from reality I couldn't come back. That was like the catalyst of, I think, for me. He would sit there and he would show me these family photos, and then he would leave and then come back the next day and he'd do it again, and he did it several times. Well, one day he's sitting there and he starts showing me the family photos, and I distinctly remember looking at him, and I remember looking at the photo, and I remember looking back at him, and I looked back at the photo, and I said to him, "You mean I'm not dead?" And he goes, "No, you're not dead." I said, "You mean I'm not dead?" I said it again, and he said, "No, you're not dead." And I sat up, and I came out of that completely dissociated state. And I know that the reason he knew how to get me out of that state was because it was familiar to him. He'd seen his buddies in Vietnam be dissociated. He probably had to help others. He himself had been dissociated. He knew how to get a person back into reality out of the dissociated state. And he did it for me. And then a day later, I was discharged from the hospital. Nobody could help me. It was like, and then he comes with these pictures. Amazing. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Always. It really always did for me until, things changed with his distancing from the family. That I couldn't experience that part of him, but he always had a positive impact on me. When I was a little girl, he would package up mistletoe in little Ziploc baggies, and he would take me over to the parking lot in the Tower District and then say, "We're going to sell mistletoe." And he made this really big deal, like mistletoe was everything. I mean, it was all but sacred, the way he presented it to me. And then he'd set me free, and then he'd take off and hide, while I had to go sell the little bags of mistletoe for 25 cents a piece. And then in the end, he collected all the money. And then get this, years and years I'd bring it up at family parties. I'm like, "Yeah, I'll never forget." And I just razz him about it. I never thought anything. And then one day he comes up to me and he says, "Peggy, can I talk to you?" I'm like, "Sure, Lance. What's up?" And he says, the thing you keep sharing about the mistletoe?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, I really want to tell you I'm sorry. I want to tell you I'm sorry and ask you to forgive me, and I would like you to stop telling that story. I think he just couldn't bear to be reminded about what a schmuck he was, putting his little sister out there to make money. And he felt bad, and so he asked me to forgive him. And I listened because I would never want to openly hurt him. So I said, absolutely. And I don't think I brought it up again until just now, So at least I kept true to the word. I think I do have a favorite memory. One of my favorite memories is just a picture of him coming home. When I lived in a house on Carmen, I was 10 years old. And he would come home in his uniform. that's when he'd buy me those gifts. He looked so incredibly handsome, and oh my God, everybody just so honored him for what he was doing. And he was as proud as a peacock in that military uniform and his hat and everything. It was just, I have a snapshot of it that I probably won't ever forget. Always very caring and loving, and always had a sense of humor, as everybody has testified. He would always get me to laugh. Just an amazing quality about him. And even in the midst of everything, when I did talk to him, every time I ever did talk to him, it was, for me, uplifting, and he was always loving and kind.
So my name is Laura Mahoney, and I am Lance's sister-in-law. And I want to say we met the first time when I was in the 12th grade, high school. He had already come back from Vietnam, so we started college together. And we were both in the same major, so we went through 5-6 years of college together, speech therapist. We used to sit in the classes next to each other because they're alphabetical order, and Lance Mahoney and Laura Mahoney go really close together when you're alphabetizing. And he used to put gumdrops on the teacher's table or desk or chair even, just to score points before the test or lecture was going to happen. Then I went in, I ended up having 3 children, and he went his way. But in 1990, he decided to leave Fresno Unified, and I took over his schools. I followed him. I hadn't been in the district for quite a few years because I was raising my children and student substitute teaching. So I went back to being a speech therapist, and the first thing I got was how incredible of a speech therapist he was, and what a calling he had with all the children. It was a hard act to follow. I had to fill some big shoes there when I took over Computech, Edison, all of Lance's schools. He was just a remarkable speech therapist. We really cared about the children. Then we also went into business together for a while with stockbroker and financial planning. That's pretty much our last time together. I want to say it was like 93, 94 that we worked together. But I feel like we were raised together because we went all through school together, studying all the same tests. And John was ed deaf, so the 3 of us were in most of our classes together. So if you think of the alphabet, it was Laura, Lance, John, all in a row, all through college. He was the type of person that had everybody always happy and laughing. In many situations when we were studying, it'd be the 3 of us, and John would go to bed because he thought we were nuts staying up all night. And we would get an A- and John would get an A, and it used to drive Lance crazy because he didn't stay up as late to study as we did. And then also your sister Tammy, she was the ring bearer in our wedding. And my brother's exact same age, same month birthday. She was our flower girl. My brother was the ring bearer. So we literally have known each other my whole adult life. From when I was 16 on, I knew Lance, watched him grow up pretty much. Well, he definitely got me through college. I don't know that I would have made it that long if I didn't have him as a study partner. It was hard because I was already married, and going to school that many years in a row to be a speech therapist is 7 years. So it was pretty much like we egged each other on because we both wanted the higher grade, and we would work really hard to outdo each other. So I graduated with honors, and I believe he did also. So he definitely was a good role model. 1968 to 1972. So he had just come back from Vietnam, and he went to college with us. Your dad was an inspiration. He was very creative. He knew how to find a way to help people at the same time running a business. And it was his idea to work with college planning in the financial arena, as far as people had money saved for college tuition, and he would find a vehicle that they could put it in that would be a retirement vehicle, so that they were able to have money come out to make the college payments, and their money grew at the same time. They didn't have to take it all out at one time. And that's how this all started. I did not take that step and go into financial planning part of it after that. I just did the college planning. But at that time, when I worked with your dad, we did Kettrick and Brittany. We did their college planning. We did a lot of Fresno people at that time. He was a 100-mile-an-hour person. He could do 5 things at one time, multitask, and he knew everyone, and everyone knew him. He was always eager to try and help other people meet with success. He wanted me to spread my wings and try something else, so I did. And to be honest, I'm still doing it today. So what little bit I learned from him, I took and multiplied it many times. But he could multitask and do just about 5 things at a time. But his one had to have was a Coca-Cola morning, noon, and night. That I'll never forget. He was just a happy person. He left speech therapy and went to working at, I want to say, like a group home. He was a counselor. He went into counseling. That's what he did. He had gone back to school and got a counseling degree. And he was great working with troubled kids. That probably was his calling. Financial planning and working as an insurance, trying to sell annuities and that type of thing. That was a big boom right about that time in the early 90s. And a lot of people went into that business. But Lance is like me. I wasn't cut out for that. I would talk people out of giving money because I couldn't guarantee that I wouldn't lose it, because you don't know what the stock market's going to do the day after you take their money. So I used to say, if you're going to put it on black in Reno or Vegas and you lose it all, are you going to be okay? And they'd go, no. I go, then don't give it to me. And so I knew that I'm just not my calling. I like to help people. And so was your dad. He was like that. So his move into financial planning probably, I don't think was the best thing that he did. I think if he had stayed with working with kids, that's where he excelled the most. Very good. Very good. They trusted him and he knew how to reach them. He was very good with them. He did talk me into that, though. How great it would be to go into business with him. Yeah, he always wanted to help somebody get better, though. That was the whole reason. I mean, he hired everybody's kids to work there, and whoever needed help, he would get them a job or something. He was always helping people. He made everyone feel at home, very comfortable. Always had a smile on his face. Always. He loved his family and his kids. I can honestly tell you that. And he had so many nightmares sometimes over things that happened in Vietnam that I think troubled him his whole life that none of us really knew about.
I'm Pat Mahoney Mastingale. I'm Lance's second wife, Michael and Lance's mother, and Travis, Tammy, and Tonja's stepmother, and sister-in-law to about half of Fresno. I was the holder of many family celebrations, often relieved by my beautiful sister-in-law, Mary Nell, and my other outlaws, Laura and Jan. Every day with Lance Mahoney was an interesting adventure. That's the best I can put it. I have so many beautiful memories. My children, my stepchildren, our European vacations that Lance earned as a top financial producer, that wonderful Alaskan vacation by the river, many Christmases, and of course the many, many trips to Capitola. Lance taught me how to laugh. I was so serious before, and I hated slapstick comedy. He was one of the funniest people I knew. He never minded being the butt of a joke, but mostly he was the one planning them. Our company had sent us to London, and one of our activities was a treasure hunt. One of the things that we needed to get was a button from a Bobby's coat. That's their police force. Lance waved down a car of Bobby's and told them of our plight. Lance was so funny and so persuasive that not only did we get a button cut right off of their coats, but we took many pictures and spent the afternoon chatting with England's finest. Lance was an extremely bright person. He dropped out of school and went to Vietnam. He came back to a wife and child. He got his GED, went to Fresno State, and with the help of Laura Mahoney, he became a speech therapist. We were married for about 2 years when he went back to school, and I believe, without opening a book, earned his master's degree. I believe he had a near-to-photographic memory. He had conversations with others that was at a level that was above me. But what I remember the most was his deep love for his children, but because of his pain, had so much difficulty expressing. He wrote this poem, and it says in there, I see myself seeing myself loving you, or something like that. And I think that was a really, really important concept to your dad, that statement there, whatever it is. It's just such a beautiful thing. I think people should have that. He was so proud of that. So he gave it to everybody, and he said, I wrote this just for you. But, I mean, I really think he means that in a way, He wrote that because he loved people in that way. The whole reason he went into financial planning was because someone bankrupted the savings of some of his friends. And he knew that he could do that job well. And he would not ever, in his heart, he believed he would not ever hurt his friends.
Legendary Stories of Lance Mahoney.